I had an emergency call, so I had to take a few minutes. So I hope everyone's doing well. I'm so glad that a lot of you are absolutely strong-willed people. I love that. And thank you for being participants in my channel, subscribers. I really appreciate all of the feedback and the great people that are involved with learning. So tonight's discussion will be a bit about when I had to go and testify against the Gugwe. Um, the area where I testified against him was about 12 miles away from where I lived. And one day, Gwantch comes, Jenjin's husband, came to the ranch, said, "Hey, it's time. I got to take you so you can testify and tell what you saw." And I previously made him a bag that was a heavy-duty hemp bag. It had been a grain bag for, feed bag. And I'd sewn an extra long, about 3-inch wide shoulder strap on it. And I double sewed it and cross sewed, stitched it. Because Gwantch told me it would need to be very strong. So he shows up, he's got the bag that I had made for him. It was a present for their wedding, for their marriage. And it was something he'd requested. And he puts me in the bag, feet first. And he tells me, grab a hold of him, hang on to him, grab his hair. And he slung me off of his left side. And then we took off from the property. At first, we went down the, and as he put me in the bag and we started to leave the property, he said, if anybody sees us and you as a child in the bag, people will think that I'm stealing you or probably going to eat you. And I told him, I know that's not the case. He says, yeah, we both know that's not the case. And then, we left the property. So as he left the property with me, we had to go across an open field. And he snuck his way across. He slung me underneath him and held me with his left hand. And kind of tri-crawled, one hand, 2 feet, across a gully area, a little dip. We had a stream that ran through. So he followed that stream very close to the ground. And we then joined up to the creek, which was about 4 or 5 feet wide, 6 at the widest, 7 maybe, and only, 3, 4 feet deep. And we followed that. As soon as we hit, high brush, he got up a little higher. But initially, first few hundred feet, he again held me and crawled on 3s. It was very peculiar feeling. It was almost like being on the underside of a horse running at a gallop, the way he was moving. He had very, very good balance. And we got into an area about probably a mile from the house where he had to speed up because there was a place where we could be seen. There were people in the area, there were homes in the area, and there was kind of some sharp turns in the particular creek. So he would do this kind of shifting gears in position. He'd go from like almost crawling to running dipped, where his back was at an angle like this. I'm hanging under his underside, and he's holding me with one hand, and he was running on 2 legs, and he was, dodging pretty good back and forth, very fluid in his movements. And further up the stream, it widened out some, and he was dodging around the banks. He did that for another about 3.5 miles probably. And during that time, he'd go from running upright to running bent over to running on all 3s. And he would bounce, depending on, the turns in the stream. He would bounce off of one side of the stream. That's how I understand, the knuckle print with the footprint and the movement, 90-degree turn, because I was literally through that, and it was a couple times I thought I was gonna like lose my grip and probably fall off of him, or go missing somewhere, fall out the freaking bag. But he always held on to me anytime that and he'd check. He'd say, "Are you all right? Do I need to hold you closer? You feel like you're a little loose there." and uh, then we broke out at about 5 miles. It was gosh, probably was the length of a block, maybe 1,200 or 1,500 feet, where we had to. There was no area that he could seek cover. So we actually, and the creek changed, it wasn't going the direction we needed to go. So he diverted from the creek at that point, and he held on to me really good with both hands at this point, because we were going to be running alongside of a major road where there were vehicles. And as we're running, I'm like, why? Why are we doing this? Aren't people going to see you or see us? And he says, no, I'm going to be running too fast. And about the time he said that, it felt like, if you've ever been on a fair ride called the Hammer, where it just, it pauses and then wham, it swings to the other end and you feel the G forces, like 3G or 2G, whatever it is. That's what it felt like when he took off. I kind of felt like air was knocked out of me against his chest. I, I couldn't quite breathe for a second until I adjusted to the fact that we were moving that fast. And it it was such a weird feeling. I definitely felt the inertia. I definitely felt how fast he was going. I had no idea how fast he was going. Then again, I asked, why are you moving this fast? And he said, human eye can't see me. Later I asked, because there wasn't a lot of time to talk. But when he described it to me later, he said that the human eye and the relay between the brain picking up the image and then digesting the information and being able to see him moving that fast would look like a blur. He said that our brains did not function fast enough to actually see them running at that speed. So when you see them disappear in front of you and you think they're walking into a dimension, it's just because they're running like the Flash out of a comic book. They're going so damn fast you can't see them. Slowing down was a lot easier. He kind of paced it down, so I didn't feel the same kind of immediate shock to my body and the inertia of us going forward. And then, he would go over logs. He would go over. We jumped a fence once. He just straight up jumped it like a horse. And when he'd hit a log, he'd slap it with his hand. He'd either pull his knees up and pop over, or he'd swing his legs over. All very fluid. Uh, I barely felt him touching the ground when he was moving. There wasn't any bounce like this. We were just cruising like straight. So his movements were incredibly fluid. And then the last probably mile or so, we were in pretty thick forest, so he kind of slowed down to what I guess he would consider a jog, which was still relatively fast, because this overall journey, though it was like 12 miles, only took him about 5 or 10 minutes to get there. At least that's what it felt like. It didn't feel like I was driving in a car to the location. It felt like a car would have been way too slow for some of his movements. And then, we went to, the family group of the Gugwe, and I, testified what I'd seen, what the Gugwe was doing to Jenjin, holding her in a location and not letting her eat, not letting her drink, and molesting her, and, all the things that I did, because I also had to tell my part. And, it took probably 2 hours uh, to describe everything that had gone on for the last 6, 8 months on our property. And, once once the testimony was over, I got a similar ride home So I was gone, just 3 hours max. And I don't even think it was that long. It was more like 2 hours, 20 minutes, 2 hours, 30 minutes. And the reason why I was able to be gone that long is because my parents were gone off the property that day. They were going up, they'd gone up to the coast to pick up feed for the mink. And that would take 2, 3 hours, sometimes four, depending on how long they had to wait for load, the feed to be loaded into the truck that we had. And my grandmother had gone in town to go visit friends and go out for lunch. And it was common for me to be alone on the property at that age, besides, as long as nobody noticed anything. In those days, early 70s, late 60s, nobody cared if a kid was home alone. Nobody gave a shit. It was common, especially if you were in a rural area, which we were. The front half of our property was in city, but the back half of our property was rural. We could pop off fireworks and other stuff on the back side of the property where, if we did it on the front side, we get a $50 fine for, popping a round off. But on the back side, no big deal. I had a lot of freedom compared to, today. You don't have that kind of freedom anymore. And, the ride back was similar. He took a bit more of a time, slower. And we took a slightly different route, though we still had to go along the same roadway. But funny thing was he actually paid attention to which side of the road he was on, and we crossed two major roads too. And he darted across the major roads the same way, so fast that he couldn't be seen, that I couldn't be seen. And and then he delivered me back to the house, property. And it wasn't too long after that my parents got home, maybe 30, 40 minutes. My grandmother took another hour or so to get home because she was visiting friends still. So when I'm talking about the things that I describe and the things that I understand about their movement, their culture, etc., it's pretty much all from first-hand experience. So and then going back, some of the first movements that he did carrying me, I'd go back, I'd go look. I went probably 3 miles up the creek one day when my parents weren't home, looking to see, you know, what his movement tracks looked like. I was very curious because it was such a peculiar experience, actually. And that's how I learned, not only from being in this circumstance of being carried, I also went back and was curious, and I already had been tracking for like 4 or 5 years at that time when I was, yeah, my parents started teaching me how to track when I was like 2 or 3. So I'd already been tracking for a few years, so, me, my curious mind, I had to go find out what everything looked like. I wanted to know. I was a very curious child. So that was how I was able to figure out, what a gravel track looks like, what, a mud track looked like, what particular kinds of movement looked like. Because not only had been carried and experienced it, I also went back through and looked at the ground spoor, the ground evidence of his movements. Because, he he just swept stuff out of his way as he was moving. If he bothered at all, if there was anything big, he'd just break it. He didn't even care. It was like, if you can imagine a martial arts master that's, from a cheap, cheesy martial arts flick that moves like the wind and can break everything in sight. It was an experience very much like that. It was very unusual, something I'd never experienced before, and probably never will experience again. But it was very interesting because I learned a lot. I learned a lot about uh, probably how they carry their own kids, and what they do to protect their own children. Their kids have to hang on, or they have to be held. Otherwise, the kid's going to fall off the back. And for a time, he did sling me around. Um, as we were nearing where we were to testify, because he also had to testify. He had to say his part. And Jenjin was there. The Gugwe was there. The Gugwe's family were all in place. So there was like her, I, him, the Gugwe, both his parents, and 3 siblings. It was quite a good little group, actually, of us. And where he and I testified, and where Jen testified, was down in a gully where the family lived. And, a very secluded, very hidden spot. So when we were, kind of jogging, he slung the bag around, and I just grabbed onto the hair around his, like, underneath his shoulder blade, and tried to straddle his back a bit in the bag, just kind of swing and jog, And so that's my experience with that. And that gave me a lot of insight. And then I've seen some peculiar movements out of them. I've seen them straight arm and break freaking trees as they're running. And it does not slow them down one single bit. And I've seen the same kinds of fluid movement, where they can just, like parkour, man, they're moving just like we do. And he seemed to have even though he like us, a rigid back, but at the same time, it seemed like his agility and his flexibility was, like somebody who was a yoga master. He could flip his legs compared to his lower body. His upper body and his lower body could be like at a pretty severe twist, and he didn't seem like he was out of balance at all. So, he'd probably practiced for quite some time to do that, or it's a natural ability. But he claimed that he'd practiced. And he told me about the whole jungle gym thing. He said he was trained to move like that. They have to learn to move like that. And they have to learn to meditate in order to do certain things. And that's why I'm familiar with the little meditation hut and what a jungle gym looks like and that sort of thing, because that had all been described to me. He said those were movements and things that he was trained as a youngster as part of their deer society. So it was particular, it was particular to the society itself, and something that wasn't common knowledge in some ways. The meditation forms were not common knowledge, for instance, and some, but not all, of the movement forms were very specific to the deer society that he had become a member of when he was very young. And those children are selected because of mentality. They have to have a certain mindset. They have to have a certain kind of level of ability. And they have to have an open heart. Yeah, as he described it, you had to have a protective and a good feeling for the world. You had to be able to notice things. You had to be able to reason with logic at a very young age, and it was those children that were selected to become part of the Deer Society and to be trained that way. So he also claimed that, some of the training and balancing and movement are something that every Bigfoot goes through. Every Sabe, every Bigfoot, whatever you want to call them, they're trained to move. They're taught to move. They're taught to think. They're taught to reason. They're taught to, they're taught their language. They're taught the knocking sequences. That's all part of their education. And they're adults by the time they are 10, and that's when they're viable for reproducing, and they are considered able to marry at that age. They can marry earlier. They can marry when they're 4 or 5, but they still have to be able to prove that they can take care of somebody else. So if it's a male, they have to be able to show that they can make tools. If it's a female that wants to marry early or has to marry early, they have to be able to prove that they can identify certain plants and be able to, distinguish poisonous plant from edible plant, and medicinal plant from an unuseful plant. And the boys have to do similar stuff. They have to show that they can make tools, they have to show that they can hunt, they have to show that they know how to trap, and etc. But at a young age, they're often fostered, so to speak. So the younger couple will be fostered by either a family, being the either the girl's family or the boy's family. Typically, it's the girl's family that fosters the couple, and they'll be fostered for a couple of years until they're of the, the adult age. And at age 8, they go through a naming ceremony, because they've survived that long. Then they're given their adult name, which is actually just their own name. It's just that the first few years, the name is not considered permanent because there's a chance they'll die from illness or injury. Uh, a dog attacking them, a coyote getting them, a cougar getting them, you know, that predation like that still is possible against these people. So that's part of their culture is, trying to teach their young ones how to move and hide and stay away from predators when they're very, very young. And, the adults are always very close. That's why you always see that, babysitter child scenario. There's always either an older sibling or a parent close by. And I've seen that actually myself while doing research, while, trying to communicate with them and trying to figure out where they are and what they do and how they do it and try to match up the lore to, them. I've seen areas where babies are sitting within 20, 30 feet of a mom or a sibling that's older. And if anything comes into the area, they will immediately go and collect the child, and then they'll move away from the area. And in fact, my dog Caesar, he went after a baby squatch once, a Gwantch individual, and yeah, he was trying to climb up a 45-degree angle hillside to get to him. And I think the reason why dogs are so attracted to him is because of the sabes, the Bigfoot scent. Um, Dogs will go after mink and ferret. Not so much after ferrets, but they would definitely go after mink. I've seen it more than once. That was one of the concerns that we had when we'd lose a mink out of a pen. The first thing we started doing was, looking for the mink, of course, but also noting if there were any dogs coming out of the property, because it would be very common that the dogs would try to kill the mink. So I think that their scent, the Sabe scent, has something to do with dogs going after them, coyotes going after them. Wolves don't seem to go after them as much, but coyotes really do, and I know that domestic dogs will. And I think that's where, you end up with dogs that get their backs broken, because that is the punishment for a dog or a coyote that bites one of their young ones. They'll break its back, and they'll leave it where the heck it bit the child, and they'll just let it starve to death. That is their legal punishment for the crime, and that's how they see it. It's a crime, which is kind of a peculiar thing to think of, but if you're looking at their perspective, they think and believe that everything is responsible for its own actions. Animals will give themselves for food and animals will not. They'll attack, but it's a choice. In their concept of the world, it's very, the animal chooses to do the behavior. It's not an instinctual thing in the way they think about it, as far as I can tell. So there's a little bit about some of their movements and the peculiarity of them. And then, he also explained, there's the reason why they could do some of the hard movements that they do and have the flexibility that they do is because they have two fused backbones, right, two vertebrae that are fused together right above the hip bracket. And that correlated to the same information that I was given by the woman from Turkey whose grandfather was a Tengu. She said the same, or Tegu, because there's Tengu and Tegu. They're two different species or two different races. They're probably all the same species because we're we're all the same species over there, different races of us. But I'm not really sure because there's also a lot of differences in these cryptid people. You know, the Oma have a hair structure very much like mink. The Gwantch also have a similar hair structure. You know, they've got an undercoat with guard hairs. But when you're looking at like Yeren and Skookum, they don't have any guard or they don't have guard hairs. They've got long hair, kind of like head hair, except it's all over their body, and they don't have any undercoat. There's no insulator coat, and their hair is longer. It's like 3, 4 inches, 5 inches sometimes, 6 inches in some cases. But on the Oma and the Guanche, the hair is only, you know, the guard hairs are only 2 inches roughly. And then I'm trying to think what other the other things that have been told. Um, you know, my father being in contact with Uncle Long for freaking ever. I mean, they met in 32 or 33, so they'd known each other for like 40 years before I ever got to meet Uncle Long. And you know, Uncle Long introduced my father to Badger Man and Mole Man, and their hair structures, according to my dad, completely different than you know, Jenjin's was. So my dad claimed that Badger Man was basically just a fucking huge badger, but he was able to speak in language, and he still acted very much like the other Bigfoot. You know, he hunted with tools, and he utilized tactics for trapping, etc. But his hair structure was still the same as a badger's, um, which is odd. And Mole Man, my dad described him, and I've gotten to see both Badger Man and Mole Man a couple of times in my life. And Mole Man is something very archaic. He's some sort of, well, they both are. You know, they're older critters. They're critters from definitely a different time period, age-wise. You know, historically, they're further back in eras. So Mole Man looks very much like a kind of an albino-looking mole, very fair-skinned. He still has a funny little kind of molish nose, uh, and very close together eyes. And his hair structure is still very mole-like, very soft, fuzzy looking, except he had quills, kind of like a porcupine, but they're real short, and they were white or light colored. They didn't have any banding on them. There was no darkness to them like a porcupine quill. A little bit bigger around than a porcupine quill. Porcupine quills are usually about the size of your pinky. Badger or Mole Man's quills are about the size of a thumb in diameter, and they're not as long. And according to my dad, they still lose. Mole Man, if attacked from behind, would still lose his quills. It's a defensive thing. So they'd still loosen and fall out like, you know, when a dog attacks a porcupine, the quills come out and they'll go through bone. Mole Man had that same thing about his quills. His quills would drop if, you know, you smacked him, and they'd go through your hand. So, very unusual creature. The rest of his body, though, looked like a mole. Just, he's like 4 foot tall, 3, 4 foot tall. And Badger Man, Badger Man, he's scraping 8, 9 foot, and he looked very much like a badger. Yeah, even to the white striping down his back. Very grumpy personality. They don't like being bothered, and they'll get abrasive with you. If you try to talk out of hand with them, basically they tell you it's not your place, and then they'll turn around and walk away. That happened to me the first 2 times I tried to communicate with him. And then Mole Man come around and said, no, 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 I can talk to him for you. He knows me. He doesn't know you. He's going to be grumpy with you. He doesn't want to talk to humans. And you're a human. So his hair structure was very much, according to my dad, very much like a badger's. The eye shine that mole men have is the same as badgers as well. You know, that really persimmon lemon with a little bit of green tint. Very, very bright. I know one area where there's a badger man that'll, if you go up into the territory where they're at, I know one area where one will drop out of a tree in the middle of the night and try to scare you, but he'll just stand there next to the tree looking at you. I'd love to be able to get some night footage of him because his eyes are incredibly bright. You know, just like a badger's. Uh, and then, you know, my grandmother's descriptions and my mother's descriptions. My mother said that the Janowska, the Ishka that she was around, uh, they didn't have any guard hairs. They had hair kind of like a chimpanzee. You know, 3 inches, black, no undercoat, kinky, crinkly looking. Uh, the Yarans also got crinkly hair. So that might be another issue. You know, trying to do any research. Oh, and dogmen, bearmen, they've got hair very much like big dogs and bears. I have a bearman hair sample, and it looks more or less like bear hair, except it smells like a human mixed with a wet dog. And the root ball on the end of the hair is very fine, very small, which is not normal for bear's root ball is usually pretty good size. And then the hair sample that I have from a Yaren individual, the root ball is very thick, very big. The hair is kind of kinky. It's brown, brownish red, cinnamony color, and about 4 inches long, whereas the bear person's hair is only about 2.5, 3 inches long. So part of probably doing any kind of DNA testing or hair sampling on these things is if you're making the assumption that you're testing for one particular species and you think everything's a Bigfoot, you're gonna get confused because the hairs are not going to be the same, and some of them are going to still remain like freaking animal hair. The scent is the only thing that gives it away as far as I can tell. Because I don't, I've done some research on hair structure, you know, the outer sheath, the medulla, whether or not it's round, oval, triangular, because there's some hair that's triangular. Um, you know, characteristics all, and oval. You know, characteristics all have to do with, some people's hair is oval, for instance, instead of round. Depends on where you are from, you know, in the world. So I think, you know, part of the confusion for science is going to be that they don't, one, realize until they, and I don't know if they're going to be able to I don't know if DNA is really going to help, you know, pick some of this out. Because if these things look very animal-like and they just look like larger versions of the same kind of animal, there might not be much of a difference in hair structure, if any at all. And I don't know about DNA. I don't know if it would carry through with any kind of genetic difference. The only thing I can tell is that you know, they have different behaviors than a normal bear. They speak a language. They can write in, you know, kana. They still use tools. They have very human culture. They have very human-like ability to identify plants and do that sort of thing. But overall, they don't look much different than a bear, other than the fact that their legs and limbs are a little longer. They've got hands instead of paws, and they walk upright with slightly longer legs, and they're bigger in size than a normal bear because they scrape 10, 12 feet. And I figured that out from how big the sitting holes are where they sit down back in a bush. You know, when they're sitting in under cover, you can tell how tall the animal is by, figuring out, rump to head height and the height of the bush they're sitting in, the vacancy, the vacant spot. So if you've got something that's sitting in there and you've got 5 foot of clearance, the individual's about 10 feet tall. If you've got 4 foot, they're about 8 feet tall because they don't have a tendency to clear brush out of the way more than a few inches over their heads, just enough to get in and out of an area. And I think that's to keep themselves concealed. And there's a lot of, from what I understand from interacting with them, they don't want contact with us because one, they don't trust us, and they don't like our behavior. We lie, we cheat, we steal. Those are all behaviors they consider very bad. Uh, like Native American, they consider that nursing your dark wolf, nursing your bad side. So they don't like us. They don't like us, they avoid us. And they teach their young to avoid us. You have to build a very strong trust relationship with them, and you have to prove to them that you're honest, trustworthy, and that you're not intending any harm to them. And part of that's probably because of the history of, being shot at and killed and destroyed. And yeah, they're very physical. They don't go in and out of dimensions. They don't fly away in spaceships. None of that was relevant. And the entire time that Jenjin was on our property, I never saw anything out of the ordinary as far as what she did. Other than the ability to make herself look like you could see through her. But, the explanation was she was trying to harmonize with energy. The energy of the sun, the energy of light. And when I asked Gwantch about how he could move that fast, it was a similar explanation. He was moving with, I can't remember exactly how I said it, but basically it came back to he was moving with light. He was not only physically moving that way, but he was kicking a gear on in his head to be able to move that way. And he said it was something that he learned to do through the Deer Society. So it was not a natural trait. It was nothing that he was born with. Uh, and Jenjin, when I was asking her about how she could disappear, they believe that certain characteristics within a child, like her clear skin, uh, was suggestive that she would have certain abilities. So she was given meditation forms that would allow her to enhance those abilities and to bring them forward. So to me, it's much more like they're training themselves to do these things, and it's a cultural thing. They're socializing each other to be able to learn these sorts of things. So it's not like any other animal or even humans. Until you get into llamas and stuff, people who Tibetan lamas, etc., and their behaviors of trying to meditate and change their energy waves, so to speak, and change their vibration. It seems that the Sabe people have that same understanding. So that's a potential, especially if they're an ancient creature. Maybe we learned that stuff from them. Who knows? So let me put my glasses on so I can see if there are any questions. Sorry, it's been a couple of gnarly days. I did get my van back today. It turned out that it was a screwed up connection on one of my battery terminals and some frayed wiring that was making it not kick over because it wasn't, relaying any energy through the system. And thank God, I've got a working vehicle again. Let me back up, try to answer some questions. Hi, Ice Dolly. Hey, awesome, Cosmic. I just bought some popcorn today. I love popcorn. It's good for you. Yeah, scary. It would. A couple of times I thought I was gonna lose my grip, and he'd always catch me. I might, fly a little off of his hip, and he'd, wrap his arm around me, make sure I didn't go anywhere. Good morning, Sonia. Sunflower. I am wondering if you had any bruises or injuries, aches or pains afterwards. I was pretty young and I was in pretty good shape because I climbed trees a lot, and I was a little sore though. My lower back, my inner legs, backs of my arms, where I tried to hang on for so long, and my hands ached for 20, 30 minutes afterwards. It felt like they wouldn't ungrip. And then, same coming back, I didn't, I felt like I was, you know, hanging on for dear life still because, my hands clenched so tight against his hair. But it didn't, I mean, it did kind of wear me out. I immediately, once we got back, I did my rounds. I did what I was supposed to do as my chores, and I pretty much went down to sleep for a while. I slept for probably 2 hours. So yeah, it did kind of wear me out, and I was still sore. Probably the next day, but I've always been pretty well in shape, so I don't have a lot of lactic acid buildup in me whenever I work out. It's very rare that I get sore, but that did make me a bit sore, because it was just such a difference in what my body was used to handling. Hey Scott, Sasquatch, good morning, any cryptid sightings? I'm gonna put up a video after this, actually a pair of videos, one with a cryptid in it, and actually the intro picture to this has a Bigfoot sitting in that V in the tree. And the reason why I'm going to put up two is because I went in one day and I videoed the tree that I was looking for. And I think that family group's actually been marriage tying for about 4 generations, from what I'm seeing in the area. That the root carving that depicts the marriage tree has 4 branches off of it. That's usually one branch for each generation. So they've been there for 4 generations. That puts them, if they've got a normal human expectancy of lifespan, 60, 70, 80 years, which is what I understand their life expansion to be. Yeah. Sorry, I'm operating on about 5 hours of sleep today because of yesterday and today and all the stuff I've had to do, and sorry about that. Life expectancy is about the same as an average human. In some cases, you know, depending, the Oma, the Gwantch, they live about 70 so years, 80 years. If they're in good health, bad health, they'll go off, be gone earlier from life. So 4 generations have put them back about, what, the 1860s, 1870s is probably when they first started doing marriage ties between the two groups up there. So in the two films, the first one, I'm talking about the tree, and then I went back the following day. And the first one's where there's an individual sitting in a blown over tree, root ball, and the root ball's like probably 8 or so feet across, maybe 9 feet across and tall. And I've done a walk around that area to see how well you can see that particular downed tree. There is a very, very narrow channel of about 200 yards on one side, and that's the only place that you can see it. You cannot see it from anywhere else on that trail. So it's kind of a secluded spot, and it's right down from the Echo Bowl. So the first film, it shows the individual there, and I'm going to go back in and do one more film in that area, just do some more confirmation for my own sake. And then the following day, I went back in at approximately the same time of day, and there isn't anything sitting there. I wasn't at exactly the same angle, I was maybe 2 feet over, so I need to go in and film at the exact same angle. But in the second film, there's an individual speaking in Chinese behind me. There was no Chinese people in the area, and it's up in the woods off where the route marker is. And I said, "Oh, that little trail there is not much going on yet." The voice came from that area. And the first day, when I was filming and the individual was sitting there, I was trying to catch some other stuff. Uh, not just the tree, but the broken trees up on top of the adjoining ridgeline to show, hey, there are 2 sets of markers here for 2 different tribes. You can hear it crashing away. Uh, and I turned the camera again to try to catch it, but he was already gone, or she. I think it was a female. They were already gone, but you can hear them leaving. You can hear like 2 or 3 steps, and you can hear, brush breaking. So you can tell that there was something sitting there, not an optical illusion, because you can hear the movement pattern out. And the second day, when I filmed, I spoke over the individual because I was trying to concentrate on my film and I wasn't trying to catch a language. Dummy, I should have just shut my mouth and let him talk. Uh, so that's something I've got to, the next time I go in, I'm not only going to do the angle, I'm going to see if I get any more language in that area. And I think I found the secondary cross down point, so I got to go explore that and see if I can get some more language or calls in those areas. Okay. Gwantch is a species. Yeah, potentially. And that's why I have that. I don't know if I'm dealing with races or species, because that's something I wasn't taught. I was told there were different kinds. And my grandmother didn't get into the definition of whether they're one species that have different races like us, or if they are all separate species. After being around them and seeing them and interacting with them, I think they're more likely separate species because bone structure is different. Sometimes, head structure are completely different. Facial structure is very similar, though, in most of them. But the hair is all different. They're different hair structures. So that would indicate that they're different species, though they all act very similarly. At least all the friendly ones seem to act very similarly. They've got very human characteristics and very tribal ways. And a lot of the red bone people are similar, but you can't trust them as much. You can't trust them. All the stories that I was told by my grandmother was that they will trick you, they will lure you, they will capture you, they will enslave you, do really nasty things to you. So like the sun-faced people, those guys, I don't do any research with them because I was taught not to trust them. And the very few interactions I have had with them, they've either been very, like, not per se aggressive, but they get way too close, and you really feel like you're gonna get snagged, you're gonna get taken, you're gonna get lost in the woods, because they don't want you there and they want to make sure you go away. And that's why I haven't done a lot of research on them, because I just don't know if I can trust them. And I don't want to disappear while I'm trying to do research and, try to bring this fucking puzzle together better, because that's what it's been for me, listening to my grandmother's lore, having her tell me her experiences and, the past experiences throughout our family and tribe, and then trying to figure out, which species belongs to what behavior, and, this story says this, and is that true? So a lot of it for me is not so much going out to try to find Bigfoot. It's been more of trying to connect the behavior to the species, and, are the stories correct? Is there any way I can verify what my native grandmother told me. And a lot of it, like all of it so far, it seems very, very accurate. Everything that she talked about, everything that she described is pretty much exactly what I'm finding. So far I haven't found any reason to doubt my grandmother's lore. So that's why I felt comfortable enough to actually start telling the stories and start bringing that information forward, because I haven't found any mistakes in her lore yet, as far as I can tell. Amma, Amma, Oma, Amma. Yeah, there might be a tribe named that. My grandmother said there were quite a few different tribal names for them. She could name off probably 50 or 60 tribal names for them. I don't have that many. I've got about 20 different tribal names that I know. And Amma is also a word that means mother. And my grandmother spoke of a group of people that were called the Amma being mothers. And that's what she described the tribal name meaning, mother. But I don't know what they look like. I've never run across one. And the how I confirm what tribe they are or what they call themselves, I literally, once I establish some sort of rapport with them and I know I'm interacting with something that's interacting with me, I'll ask them, what tribe are you? What family do you come from? What tribe are you? And they will usually volunteer a single word and tell you. That's how I figured out there were Skookum here, because they literally told me, we Skookum, um, out in the Yeren territory. I asked them, what tribe are you? They gave me a single word, Yeren, which blew my mind because I expected that tribe to be in China. But then my grandmother, that was one of the conflicts she had, because she grew up around Yeren. And then when the Chinese government released the information about the Yeren in China, she's like, I thought they were only here. She was a little shocked by the fact that they were in China and not just here, because she always thought that they were just in America, because that's what she knew, and what she'd been taught was that they were here. So it was, a shock to her to think that they were in another country. So most of what I understand about their tribal names, it's because I've asked them. Jenjin, I asked her what tribe. Oma, Gwantch, I asked him what his tribe was. He's like, Gwantch. And then when I asked him his name, because that was one of the first sets of information when I met him the very first day, who are you, what are you called, and where you come from, what's your tribe? Because I already knew from Jenjin that it was tribal system, and that was familiar to me because I'm native. I understand what tribes are, and bands, and clans, and family groups. Because those are all relevant within the, hierarchy or tier structure of tribal people, indigenous people. So he said Gwantch, and then I asked him his name, and he says, Gwantch. And I'm like, are you messing with me? He says, no, that's my name. And I said, well, why are you named after your tribe? He says, well, it's a name of honor. It means strong warrior, it's considered a good name, in that it blesses with the history of the tribe. There's the connection of it's an honor to have that sort of name. So that's how I know those particular things, because I ask. And every once in a while, I'll get a name out of somebody, and they'll, if they talk to you at all, it's kind of difficult to get them to do that. You have to have it took like 2 or 3 months before the Skookum here started talking any words. But once you get a rapport, they won't get into a conversation with you, but they'll give you words. They'll give you 1 or 2 words at a time. And it will be because, you're asking a question and they answer it with a single word. And that's usually how they prefer to do it. You don't get a lot of information out of them. You kind of have to rely on reading the kana. At least I have to rely on reading the kana. And even with, being in their territories and being in their areas, it's not so much that you're habitualizing them, because you're not. What's really going on is you're picking up where they're at. You're figuring out whether you're conscious of that or not. You are figuring out, their movements. Because you get used to being in an area and oh, okay, I hear this behind me. Because they'll cross behind you a lot. And it's not an attack behavior. Uh, the individual in front of you is the one that's letting you see them to confirm what they are, and the individual behind you is typically trying to talk to you or tell you something. So it's their protective way of interacting with us, because they don't trust us. They consider us dangerous. Though they're huge, they're kind of afraid of us in some ways. I know they can take us out, but they also know to be leery of us because of our violent behavior and our bad behavior. Our not nursing our good wolf. Unless you've got a good rapport and you've got a good personality and you're honest with them, and then they're a little bit easier to get to know, and they get more interested in sharing with you and trading with you and giving you words. But it still takes time. Still takes a couple months, and I still haven't seen, other than at night, a eye shine. The one individual I got a picture of potentially, and the little one that comes to the yard that my comes running up to every once in a while. And this dog likes to make friends with everybody, and she gets fed in several different locations by different species of sabe. There's a Skupkum family that feeds her. There's a Gwantch individual that feeds her. And I use her as my secret spy. So what I do when she comes back out of the woods is I smell her breath to see what kind of meat she's been given. And they've fed her fish, and rabbit, and some other meat that smells very much like a hamburger. Potentially that's dog, because dog actually tastes and smells a lot like a cow, but greasier. Don't ask how I know that. I've eaten a lot of peculiar things in my life because it's part of my culture. You know, alligator, rattlesnake, dog, cat. Natives, we'd keep the dogs that were good and the ones that misbehaved we ate in the wintertime because, well, they misbehaved. Meaning they wouldn't follow directions, or they were too loosey tuned to train. So an animal like that's considered a food animal. And in time of need, you will eat them. And that was part of my cultural bringing, uprising or upbringing, growing up. I was always encouraged to, well, have dinner, so to speak. Yeah, they do have a very good sense of of reading you. They, let's see, who was that? That was Sunflower. I would imagine they can read your energy very quickly. This is what I felt anyway. Yes, they can definitely tell your body posture. They can tell what your facial structure indicates. If they know you're holding a secret. If they figure that out very quickly. They've got a very in tune mindset for watching our behaviors, and it's probably because they watch us all the time. We walk through their territory and we don't even realize we're next to them because of the way they live. They don't show themselves. They have habitual behaviors that are intended behaviors to keep us from seeing them. So they get the advantage of watching us while we're completely unaware of them, typically, unless, a sound is made or you smell their scent. In fact, the last time I was up in the Skookum area, there was one very close to where I parked, because the scent was all over the area. There were a lot of people up there that day, so I didn't want to be too obvious about things. And, I'm listening to people as they're going in and out of the trailhead, and they're like, what is that scent? That's not skunk, but I don't know what that is. And I know it wasn't bear. I know it wasn't deer. I know it wasn't cougar. Because every animal has a very particular kind of smell with their scent. And yeah, it was definitely a Bigfoot scent. Because it's that sweaty BO, kind of skunky but not skunky, kind of musky but not musky. They've got a very particular scent. Are you sure? At your testimony, how and by whom was judgment determined? Ah, that's an excellent question. So, what happens with that was, yeah, the Gugwe's back was already broken. So he was paralyzed from the waist down. And that was, that's part of their legal action. So he had to go and face his parents and his family while uh, the victim and two witnesses described what happened. At the end of the testimony, either his family could have chosen to face him and take him in and leave him as paraplegic and continue to allow him to live. But if they turned their backs on him, then the judgment was he wasn't fit to live because of his bad behavior. They figured, he would repeat even if he, was pelagic. So the law that they have is that, the victim and the victim's family has a right to put him on a pig pole to execute him, kill him, and to display the fact of what happened. That's part of the big hashtag pig pole. It's to display what the individual did. Because he hit her, the arm was taken off. His right arm was taken off because he's right-handed. Because he molested her, he was skinned from the neck, from the elbow up to the neck, and from the knee up. And that pelt was thrown up on the, pig pole on the left-hand side while his hand was displayed on the right. And, depending on the type of crime, those elements will be put in different places. And then there was also the judgment. An agreement was discussed, because this is done kind of as native council. Once the punishment's carried out, there are certain things that are done. The family has to say, well, I know I owe a fine to Jenjin. So the amount of the fine was discussed by her and her husband and the two families, her husband's family and the Gugwe's family, because it was her husband's, it was Jenjin's husband's family who came forward to assist her and to put the Gugwe on the pig pole. And Jenjin's family had no bearing in it because she was already out looking for a mate. Once she's turned out to look for a mate, it becomes the responsibility of the man who marries her. It's the way their culture works. And, the understanding is there are certain punishments that are mandatory. It's the way things are done. It's the consequence for the action. And that's kind of what the pig pole thing is. But, there was also the agreement of a yearly fine that needed to be paid for the rest of Jen's life to her by the family of the Gugwe, because they had not taught their son to act appropriately within the community. So they have to pay every year a tithe to her, X amount of pounds of goods, of food, etc. And they do. So there's always that, there's that secondary repercussion to the family overall because they raised a bad child that that created such a horrific circumstance and a bad crime for a prolonged period of time. They owe the victim a fine. Oh, thank you, Jason. Congratulations on getting your van back. It's 27 degrees outside this morning. Yeah, we're sitting at 32 degrees this morning, and the silly street sweeper guys. God, not only did he sweep the street, he sprayed the grass, sprayed the concrete with freaking water, dummy. I don't know why he did that. It got a little slippery as I got up towards the top of the hill turn. Cosmic. There was a recent interview on Flash of Beauty channel that claimed he saw a Sasquatch shapeshift into a deer. Yeah, I've never seen that. I've never experienced that. I, I don't know if it's possible or not. I know that some of the Native Americans that I've spoken to that belong to what they call the Bear Society, they learn to shapeshift. So it might be possible. It's just I've never seen it. But I don't know everything. I know a little bit. I wish I knew as much as my grandmother did. Um, and I have, heard stories within Native communities, within different tribes, that shapeshifting is possible. I've never physically watched it happen. Uh, so I can't, in my mind, I can't speak on that because I've never witnessed it. And my grandmother did have some stories about that sort of thing. But it was, when she was telling me about, what do they call them, the skinwalkers on the Navajo reservation. She said those people could shapeshift, but it was because of the magics that they practiced. It wasn't because of meditation. It was because uh, of the behaviors and the rituals that they did and that sort of thing is what she claimed. It was dark shamanism, dark magic, practicing witchcraft instead of shamanism, basically, in her mind. And the Navajo reservation is the only place they believe those things exist. So, um, I, these people that are doing the whole phantasmagoric thing, oh, this is a shapeshifter, this is that. No, you don't know your history, and you don't know the culture. I'm glad you're looking for clicks, but you're not giving anybody any good information. You're looking for a fantastic reply. You're looking for people to be awestruck and then hit the button, yay. But it just deludes and pollutes the information because it's inaccurate, which doesn't help. If we're trying to figure something out, that really doesn't help. That's the one drawback about that kind of behavior is it doesn't really help the circumstance. I mean, it's one thing to be grappling with a question and you don't know the answer and you are trying to figure it out and you're trying to use science to figure it out and you're trying to, analyze things and try to come to conclusions. Well, that's scientific work. You've got a lot of questions and you're trying to figure them out and you're trying to get answers to those questions. That's really what science is about, and that's what any kind of lab work or analyzation is going to be. It's a process of discovering and confirming, which, God, I wish there was more science-oriented people interested in this. More people really need to bring this back out of the grave of mythology, and myth and sociopsychology, because that's the other end of it. Everybody who sees a Bigfoot, and the reason why they don't freaking talk about them is because they don't want to be called crazy. Because, socially you can't talk about that. Like, no, it's lore, it's reality, it's life. For God's sakes, There's been so many different things on this planet throughout history. You know, why would it not stand to reason that some of them might still be hanging around and living, and we just, don't know about them because we think they're a piece of mythology at this point. Yeah, sunflower children do tend to bounce more than adults. Uh, and, a child won't get as sore as quickly because, well, you got little, Tigger springs. You still are quite pliable. Your body's still quite flexible and limber. So when you fall as a child or you um, run into something, you have a tendency not to get as hurt as an adult. One, you're not as big, so the whatever you run into, etc., is not going to hurt you as much because there's just not enough inertia to hurt you in most cases. And we are a little, you know, more. Our bodies are more flexible, so we have a tendency not to try to catch ourselves when we're little. We just fall, and actually, uh, we relax a little bit. Whereas when we're adults, we have a tendency to try to shock. We try to brace ourselves. We try to stop ourselves from falling instead of just letting it happen. And I think that's more about how we get damaged. It's when you try to stop yourself sometimes that you actually cause yourself more damage instead of just catching yourself at the right moment. But you have to have a background in either gymnastics or some sort of gymnastic kind of thing before you get it. That there are certain ways you can fall and you won't hurt yourself. Martial arts teaches that. There are certain ways you can twist your body. You can slap the ground. You can relax, and you can take a throw and not get hurt. And you can take a pretty good throw and not get hurt. And it's all about just giving yourself that little blink, cushion and a bounce that keeps you from tearing muscles or breaking bones. Hey Phil, Grand Rising everyone. Sending good vibes your way. Awesome, thank you. And yeah, I'm really really happy with everybody who's subscriber. Sorry, I am so dang wore out today. I'm so happy for all of the subscribers that I have. You guys have been really great. You're awesome. I love the questions that you have. I love the fact that you are so steadfast because it means you really do have an interest in this topic. And I'm happy for that because uh, the better education people have, or at least better understanding that they have, the more they can apply the information and they can confirm it for themselves. And with the amount of voluntary education, it's great. You all right there, baby? Oh, okay. Okay. Cosmic. I'm still catching up with all your videos. Who is Jenjin? Jenjin was an Oma Bigfoot female who lived on our mink ranch when she came to our ranch just before my 5th birthday, and she didn't leave our ranch until I was about nine and a half. So she was basically a Bigfoot that lived on our property, and I had daily contact with her. She kind of took over my blackberry fort, and I had to put up with her as my roommate under that fort because, well, that's where she lived for a very long time. That name, again, Cosmic, that name sounds synonymous with Dijin, which is the name Arabs call the entities. I wonder about all the connections. Actually, Jenjin is an Asiatic name. It means golden person. It translates the same in Chinese, Japanese, Taiwanese, Korean, Cantonese. Those are the ones I can name off the top of my head. And Dijin and Jin are actually two different species of genies. Dijin is the higher form. They're nasty as hell. They're the ones that'll betray you. And Jinn are the better genies that will grant you wishes. But none of them are around anymore because who was it? King Solomon who put them all in jars and threw them in the Black Sea and Caspian Sea? At least those are the stories of the, Arabic people. Sunflower, what are the common causes of death? Do they get the same illnesses as humans, such as cancer? I would assume they could have cancer. Old age is typically a big one. Um, I did run across one individual, which is one of the Bigfoot that I know where the body of is. He had a severe lung infection. Infections and diseases have certain scents and smells to them. He was older. He was gray. You could smell the illness on him, and he was eating a lungwort to try to counteract the infection in his lungs. But he died from basically a lung infection. And the female that I know her location, she died due to human interaction. Somebody shot her. And then I also know where one of the miscarried babies that Jenjin had, the little dog pup, I know where that one's buried because I helped her bury it. Okay, Cosmic. You mentioned jungle gyms. What types of things do they build for jungle gyms? Well, they'll take a single tree and they'll lean another tree and they'll lean it usually in a branch. Sometimes they'll shape that branch. It'll be kind of an L shape or a J shape to it, or it'll kind of have a hook shape to it, so the second tree can lay in that crook. I've also seen where they'll take an entire tree, uproot it, and stick it in the top of another tree and kind of make that into a teeter-totter. Those are two of the more typical ones. But I've seen some very complex ones, where they'll have a maple tree or something that's lower branched and wider branched, or any tree that will branch out, and they'll put cross sticks in it, or they'll put ladder sticks. So they'll use a tree and they'll add material to it to make a stable climbing brace. That's the most common way of constructing them. And some of them can get pretty intricate with the way they're done. I know the location of one that's almost rotted away. I used to climb it. In fact, I'd intentionally go to the area to climb it because it was really fun to climb. It had its first branches off of it were like 4 feet off the ground, and then you had all these crossed sticks in it and a couple of trees that were leaned into it, so you could go back and forth up it, and then you go back down the other way. You could go back down the trees that were leaned into it. I'll probably try to get some pictures of that before it completely falls apart. But they're usually pretty intricate, and they're usually pretty obvious. Um, and sometimes you'll find completely different trees in the tops of the main tree that's alive. Like you'll find like an alder tree with a madrona tree stuck on the top of it. And that's the other thing when you're looking at any kind of little hangers or anything that you think might be deadfall, make sure it's the same wood. If it's not the same wood, then you definitely know it's a hanger of some sort, a marker, or if it's got particular structure to it where they've twisted the fibers and crooked them, bent them over. That's another thing that they like to do. In fact, I had an area where I had I think they were cedar trees if I remember right. No, excuse me, they were juniper trees. And my dad had cleared out all the underbrush so that I could have a place to climb because I was such a little monkey kid. I loved to climb trees when I was little. And he trimmed a few of the branches out of the way so I could get around inside the tree and have some fun. And when Jenjin realized I liked the trees and that there were a couple of low branches that I would throw a blanket over between the two branches, and I'd kind of make it into a hammock, and I'd day nap in my tree branches. When Jen Jen realized I liked the tree, I was about 2 days or 3 days after my dad cleared all the brush out, and I was hanging out in the tree pretty good. She went over and one night, she like softened, she worked the branches, which were about 3 inches in diameter, with her hands and made them real floppy and like limber. So I could just pick up the branch and move it in whatever direction I wanted and lay it into the other branch, etc. And she hadn't destroyed the fiber so much that the bark was torn or that the fiber was broken so severely that the branch died in any way. But she'd softened it enough that you could just move it into whatever position. And then it took about 4 or 5 days, maybe a week, for that branch to harden back up again so it wasn't as flexible and floppy. So that's how they make a lot of their tree sits and tree stands and stuff. They actually soften the material by bringing it, twisting it and crushing it with their hands a little bit to make those fibers movable. So keep that in mind. They also sculpt trees. Oh my goodness. Wow, Cincinnati is getting pretty cold there, Melissa. Oh, thank you, Sunflower. I was just running. In fact, I'll tell you a real brief story of my mother and her bravery, because her turnout was done with the Ishka. She lived with five, what you call Janowska. Most people think they're incredibly dangerous, and they can be, because you have to respect them. You cannot. They have a cultural thing. They don't like being looked in the face, and it's not because they're taking it as a challenge, but they consider it disrespectful. Booger people are the same way, and I don't know their tribal name. I just know the pioneer's name for them. But Gwantch, when I was doing the testimony, the Gugwe's mother was a booger person, and Gwantch referred to her as a booger. So it may not be just a pioneer name for him. It might be some sort of intercultural name for him because he didn't call her by any other thing. That's what he called her species. So it might be actually what they call them or what they call themselves. Um, it's just, yeah, well, don't worry about it. Let me see if I got some more questions. I'll just get on with it. Yes, Jason. Some asked this question: are we related to the Sabe? Native Americans realize that we're related to the Sabe. It's part of the reason why we call them forest brothers, because we understand that we can produce children with a good portion of these people, and it doesn't matter which species they are. I don't know if bear or badger people can reproduce with us, but there are stories of dogmen and what we call Bigfoot, Gwantch and the Oma, Yaren, Skookum. Supposedly they can all reproduce with us, which would put them in our species group. Because, you can't be a human being if you can't crossbreed with us. So that doesn't matter at that point what genetics says, DNA evidence, hair evidence. If they can mate with us and produce an offspring, then they are our species, period. At least that's what all the books claim. So we'll see how that argument goes. Maybe that's part of the reason why they are having a problem with trying to do any research and trying to bring this stuff forward, because people don't want to think about that. You know, that's probably going to flip a bunch of people out. But there are plenty of stories, even pioneer stories. There's a couple of stories here in the Northwest, actually, of pioneer women who had been taken and impregnated, and you know, ended up bearing children. And sometimes the children look like the Sabe, and sometimes the children look like us. It was a tradition in Native American culture. If the baby came out looking like a Bigfoot, you set it back at the edge of the woods so they could take it home and care for it. So it wouldn't be, discriminated against or have the chance of, when they're younger, accidentally harming somebody, because they still have to learn their strength. And that was something, when I was uh, in the redwoods with my mom, and I had helped, well, I'd saved the Skookum child from being attacked, bitten by the coyote. I played with that child. I interacted with that child while he was healing. And I remember one day and he was a little shorter than me. I was trying to show him how to build a log cabin. He didn't want to play my game. And I grabbed his hands because I was used to, my family relatives that were younger than me, showing them how to do stuff by, grabbing their hands and showing them. And he didn't want to. He pulled his hand away. And my mom warned me. She said, don't try to force him. He's stronger than you. If he hits you, he could break a bone or severely hurt you. Oh, okay. I won't do that again then, because my body can't take it. Yikes, 36 degrees, Jason? Yow. It's cold all over this year. Wow, Iowa 10 degrees. Wow, Phil. Okay, John. That is so wrong what Jenjin had to go through. I wish I could give her a hug. Yeah, I'm just glad that we were able to get some justice for her. And she does have children now. She's got adult children at this point. I think she's got 4 offspring. Um, her husband's still alive. Gwantch is still alive. And I get to see them every once in a while in the daylight, but they're always at a distance. I don't get to interact like I did when I was a child with them. They keep their distance just because they don't want anybody noticing that a human is too close to them. They don't want anybody reacting badly. So I'll see him at distance. I'll see hear Jenjin. There's a little call sequence that we do that we agreed upon, when I was a child. So I always know when she's in the area, but she doesn't come to visit as nearly as often as my adopted father. Gwantch visits me a couple times a year, and I only see or interact with Jenjin every couple of years, typically. Yeah, it's probably because she's got her kids to deal with in her home life, and the males do all the hunting and gathering of bigger game anyway, so they go a little further distance if they're not interacting and trading locally. Sonia, oh, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoy the content. Stories, because my grandmother wanted this stuff preserved, and she wanted to make sure that at least the Native Americans, if not other people that had an interest in it, would have the information. She was it's been 5 generations in my family, and we've been keeping our mouths shut and not talking about it, not telling anybody outside our family. Heck, other people in our family don't even know about some of this stuff. It was teacher to student, and nobody else knew. It was just because we wanted to keep the information safe. We didn't want anybody talking about it. We didn't want any exposure about what was, being historically kept. So we always, there are lots of members of my family that don't even know uh, the training that I went through, or etc. But, there are a couple that do. In fact, one of my relatives shocked the heck out of me because I found out they knew more than I realized they knew, and I, for years, thought they didn't know a dang thing about it. But, trying circumstance, and all of a sudden, uh, we're hand talking, you know, not talking out loud about the subject, but we're hand talking about it, like Native American sign. And I'm like, oh my God, grandmother taught you this? I didn't know that I didn't know our grandmother taught you that. So there were always those little surprises too within Native culture, because Natives don't always tell each other everything. Sometimes we keep stuff quiet just because it's easier to protect each other that way. You keep quiet about something, you don't know about it, means you can't say anything, means there's no problem with anybody else learning it without you directly being involved. Cosmic, do you think they build swings? If so, do they use ropes that they find or some other form of twine? I have found 2 incidences of ropes being used as at least climbing and swinging devices. One was a length of blue climbing rope that had been tied up in a tree, and that rope would go everywhere the family went. And there was lots of little footprints of the younger ones that were climbing it. And I've also seen cording made out of ground vine like ivy, or bush vine like honeysuckle, that would be twisted or woven together. And same kind of thing, it was being climbed by a juvenile, a baby. And then it's usually the really, really young ones that they have those kind of things. And they will move them. The material, they'll take the material with them if they can. That's another a good gift, actually. If you've got young ones, probably giving them a rope would be something they would enjoy. Ropes and bags. Adults will like bags. Kids will like ropes. Kids like toys. Stuffed toys are a good one for them. They really enjoy those. And natives always traded food, especially during the winter. Though you gotta be careful, you can't trade with just any kid. You don't want to get the kid in trouble. I ended up doing that the other night. One of the Skookum boys, the one that's here in the yard a lot, wanted pine cones, but I traded some herb bread to him. And how I made it, clear to him that I don't have any pine cones, I put the piece of pine cone on top, so he knew it was in replacement for not having pine cones, because he'd already collected everything out of the yard. So yeah, he got in trouble, and he got turned out for a night in the cold, because he didn't evidently trade with permission. He probably wasn't supposed to trade with me, and he did it anyway. Or maybe mom got mad because he didn't bring enough for everybody, or mom got mad because she sent him out for pine cones and he brought back bread. It was probably meant to go in the Lauders, the stores, food stores for the winter. It meant he messed up. He didn't bring the right thing back. And I didn't realize that might be a problem, so I goofed that one myself. Sunflower, what size are the newborn babies? Have you ever seen one? I'd imagine that if a human female gave birth to a hybrid, it might be quite painful and large. Actually, their babies are only about 4 or 5 pounds. They're very tiny. But they grow really quickly. Once they're out of the womb, they grow really quickly. But their babies are actually very small. It's surprising how small they are. And in all actuality, so are, greater primates babies. They're also quite small. They average 4 or 5 pounds. So it's actually not too difficult for us to bear one of them. They're typically 2 pounds, smaller than our normal small babies. So, but expect that baby to grow very quickly because within the first year they're about 24 inches tall, and they're really really smart. They're already learning language, they're already learning toys, they're already learning, play behavior, that sort of thing. And I want to address something actually about that whole, do they mimic? I got a question for y'all. How'd you learn language? You learned it by mimicking your parents talking to you. Your mama, dada. Your parents say that to you, and then you learn to say mama or dada. So when people say, oh no, Bigfoot doesn't have any mentality, they're just mimicking, we do the same thing in order to learn language. So there's no argument there. It's a non-point, because that it's meant to, that kind of language is meant to make you think they're doing something that's abnormal or not the same as us. It's meant to make you think they're just a dumb monkey mimicking us, mimicking calls. No, we do the same stuff. We mimic animal calls. Anytime you whistle, you're actually, whether you realize or not, making a bird call. You know, anything like that. You're, if you were looking at it as a person in the natural world and you were interacting with the natural world, a whistle is going to be a bird call. Mm, duh. So some of the stuff that people talk about when they're, I hate to say it, thinking they're doing research, because some people do, it's just literally they're not grasping that there's more than one type of Bigfoot out there. They're not grasping the fact of that they have any kind of culture. They're still in that whole mythic cycle of understanding. And I don't want to diss on them. It's just they don't have the lore. They don't have a native cultural understanding. And there are a lot of native people that I could pull a hair sample out and go, hey, look what I got. And their eyes will get big and they'll go, that's Sabe hair. They know it because they've already seen it. Some elder has shown them. And that's something that's lacking within the European American culture. You're never shown that sort of stuff as a child. You're never given any explanation of them. You're not ever educated about them in any way. So there's no recourse. I don't want to like grump about it too much, but it's just it's still a myth in American culture, but it's not a myth in Native culture. They're not a myth. We understand they're there. They've always been there. And in fact, here's a good example of some of the knowledge that's retained within the Native American culture that's not within the European culture here. When you break your hyoid bone, hyoid bone, it's a soft, spongy bone that allows vibration to occur around your voice box. Surgically, it cannot be repaired. There is no medicine that will repair it if it's broken. Native Americans understand that this bone came around when we were very ancient people. It's a prehistoric bone. That's how we understand it. And that vibration, singing, can fix it and mend it. That's completely lacking in modern medicine. They don't understand that it can be repaired. Once the bone is broken, a doctor can't fix it. But You go sing in a drum circle long enough and you hold that bone, it can be healed. It will snap back into place and it will completely fix itself. And we understand it's because of the vibration. And we also understand the nature of that bone. We understand that it's a spongy bone that was, a dino bone at one point when we were more ancient people. It's a difference in understanding between two cultures. Yes, Sabe do like tobacco. In fact, it's native tradition to tie tobacco bundles in Sabe territories. Wherever you know that there's Sabe, you take a little, you know, dime-sized piece of tobacco and you put it in a little piece of cloth and you tie it in a tree. And it's also Native American belief that you get rid of bad spirits by putting tobacco ghosts in trees. So if you got a bad spirit in an area, you can get rid of it by tying tobacco bundles. Yes, Jason. Uh, the Sabe society is very much like ours. That's why I'm always referring to them as indigenous people because they act so much like indigenous people, and they live very much like we did. If a group uh, is expanding, or if there are two tribes living next to each other, we used to delineate our hunting grounds. We'd put up markers. They do the same thing. Uh, a lot of the behaviors that they have, teaching their young and training, like Bear Woman's a good example. She's teaching her granddaughter now to identify certain things, and she's showing her, this leads to that. This is what germinates this. This is how you get, mushrooms to grow. You break them and you spread them around. If you want uh, the rot to come, you take rotten wood and you put it around a tree trunk that's going to rot. If you want mushrooms to grow on it, then you seed it with that particular fungi and it will grow there. And that's not animal behavior as a dog or a cat would do. That is behavior that we would do. So they function mentally and socially very much like we do. At least a lot of the different kinds of Sabe do. The red bone people, some of them have those kind of characteristics as well. They still build structures, they still teach each other, train each other, they still do a lot of that same behavior, but they also have a tendency to be cannibals, or they have, a more standoffish and aggressive behavior towards us. So they're not as amenable to be around. There's a good chance you might get hurt around a sun-faced person, where I wouldn't be worried about walking up to an Oma or a Gwantch or a Skakkum or a Urine individual. And I wouldn't even be worried, for me, not necessarily for anybody else, but because my mother had been in her turnout around the Janoskwa, and I've been in their little bubble cave systems, and I understand what my mother told me, I would not be too afraid of going into where they are, because I know I need to, not look at them. They're the one they're the one group that I know doesn't like that because they see it as disrespectful. You're disrespecting them because they consider themselves a parent species of some of the other species, and they have a certain status of expectation. We are better than that. We are the first ones. You have to pay respect to us. So it's like bowing your head in Japan. You keep your eyes down. You don't look them in the face, because then they'll think that you're disrespecting them and that you're not per se challenging them, but that you don't believe they're worth the status, that they're not the stature that they believe themselves to be. So it's more, uh, you know, personal concept, not an animal behavior, not something like looking at a gorilla or a baboon or a chimpanzee that's angry and looking at him and then they having a reaction to you. It's not that sort of thing. It's actually, the when I did almost get pushed out of the cave that I was in, and it wasn't a big cave. It was just a couple feet thick and, just long enough to lay down in. I was examining sandals that the Ishka had made, and my mother had warned me, don't touch anything of theirs. They get defensive about it, and don't look them in the face. And I did both of those things like a dummy, and I was fine. I had been in that cave for probably 10 minutes, just sitting there looking at stuff, at little stone pieces and little clay pieces and the shoe, the sandal. And then I made the mistake. I touched the sandal, I flipped it over to look at the work, and here comes the owner, the one who was making it. Oh, and they had a wood owl, a little spike used to work the grass through to braid it, because it was woven braided. It was really tight, really beautiful work. As soon as I touched it, though, here came the individual that owned it and was working on it. He wanted to know why I was there. And when I looked him in the face, because I didn't think for a moment, he shoved me. And I almost slipped out of the cave, and that would have been about a 200-foot fall. Uh, thank God I knew how to climb by then, so I grabbed a rock. And I put my eyes down, and I didn't look him in the face again. I didn't touch his stuff again. So being able to understand the behavior, that helps a lot. And I think a lot of the sightings and the interactions, it's either potentially misunderstood behavior in some cases, or it's somebody's done something previously in the area that may have aggravated them or angered them, because the few times I've had bad reactions, even around Oma, it's because some other human's been in the area and done something previously that has angered that group, and that anger can last for months, and they'll be very guardant. And if you go into an area that somebody else has had a bad interaction, you still get blamed for it. You still get followed. You still get messed with. You still get the same. They don't want people in there. They want you to go the hell away. And they'll whoop, they'll knock, and they'll try to force you out of the area. They'll surround you. They'll shake bushes at you. They'll throw stuff at you. Sometimes they'll throw branches at you. I've had that happen. But the interactions I've had like that, it's usually because I've either done something wrong, my animal has done something wrong, or somebody previously has gone into the area, it's a human, and done something wrong in the area. So some of the behavior that people have as encounters may not be anything other than they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Thank you, El. I love you and your content, but have a hard time hearing as the volume is very low. Maybe you can somehow get better speaker. All I have is my phone to do this on. I don't, where I'm at, I don't have internet, and I don't do anything through my computer, laptop at this point. So unfortunately, I only have my phone to deal with this. And, it's also the most convenient thing for me to take in the woods. I don't have to transfer the medium from one spot to the next. So I'm sorry about the volume. I'll try to speak up a little bit more. I do have kind of a soft voice. I'll try to make sure I pump my volume up so the speaker will, the recording device will be able to pick up at a better pitch. I don't, I don't do OnlyFans. Actually, the only internet thing that I really do is YouTube. I've got email. I have a Facebook page I haven't looked at in months. I'm not a real big tech person, and the only reason why I have a YouTube page is just to try to share my grandmother's lore. That was the intention of creating it. Once I figured out I could use my phone to do that, I didn't have to transfer mediums. I didn't have to screw around with, my computer to some other device, blah, blah, blah. It was convenient. It's easy. Done deal. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, Elle. Yeah, people sometimes have a real hard time. I think my voice range is not necessarily the most audible. Because other people in conversation will sometimes not be able to hear me too. And I'll be, 3 feet away from them. Well, I've spoken, are you sure? I have spoken with some natives about that, dogma and tobacco as well. Uh, what would they prefer? I believe that all the natives that I've spoken to, it's same thing, tobacco. I don't usually typically use tobacco out in the woods as anything, as a marker or anything like that, because well, I'm trying to get them to interact with me, or trying to get them to speak around me, or show themselves to me, or let me find their stuff. Let me take a look at that. I want to know your kana. I want to know what you do. I want to know where you pass through. Yeah, I'm trying to grab some evidence so that people can understand them a little better too, and show the repeatable behaviors that they do, so that it's easier for people to understand that they're in an area, and then what kinds of things they might be able to find in those areas. Because part of this for me is also exposing the public to enough information that they can understand what they're seeing when they're going out and interacting with them, or being in areas where they're at, or if they're trying to do research, try to give a few more clues to break down the barriers, so maybe science will eventually take an interest in him. But then on the other hand, I don't know if science is actually what I want happening, because science doesn't, on this particular subject, science does not have a good running point. They keep throwing them back either into the mythology cycle, or hey, they're just a bunch of big monkeys. Well, we're a bunch of big monkeys, but we have a different behavior set than a gorilla. We have, different behavior set than chimpanzees or any other primate, larger or smaller. We understand those guys are animals, and we are an animal that speaks and thinks and has different behaviors. And I don't think I don't think that some biologists, scientists, etc., have gotten a good enough understanding yet to realize there's more than one type out there, let alone that they speak, they have culture, they have societies, that they act anything like us. I don't think they get that. A lot of biologists and scientists seem to think that, what they see on the surface, some of the calls and the throwing shit at you behavior, that's the extent of it. That there's nothing behind that. They don't know what the rest of the things are that they do. So they have a very surface level understanding, and they're running with it, and that's where they're drawing their hypotheses from, is that very surface level of understanding. But I know that's nowhere near the level of understanding they need in order to actually investigate, these people, and actually come up with, ways of communicating about them and actually being able to describe them, because they're trying to paint a picture that fits their mold of understanding, and you really can't do that with the Sabe. They're not like that, and it doesn't matter if they're a dog man, what we consider a Bigfoot, etc. They're very much like us, and I don't think science has grasped that yet, unfortunately, and they probably won't until They use something well, and even, if they shot one, that's not going to give them anything really. You just killed an individual, and yeah, you can do a lot of dissection and understand that particular individual, but there are 20 other species. So you're not going to get a clear picture of anything with just one sample. And you've also committed murder. Not a good thing. At least in my opinion. So that's, I don't know how long it's going to take science to figure that one out. I think they're going to actually have to have, a couple more people like Melba Ketchum who are actually realizing that they live in tribal groups and that they interact more like people. And, that science itself has to stop thinking they're monkeys. They have to come to the realization that the behavior are not monkey set behaviors, not greater primate behaviors. It's human-like behaviors that they do. And that's why I'm trying to capture the language and the fact that they make clay pots and etc. and that they have boundaries and they have hunting territories and they mark them and that they have certain things that they do. It's it's like a it's like hopefully maybe my information will educate somebody in the scientific field or at least give them enough of a clue that they'll look in a different way. uh, for instance, Dr. Bendernagel he had a very clear understanding to a degree that they were more human-like because of the accounts that he had, interactions with some of the Sabe that people had that described them as carrying tools and wearing clothes or wearing necklaces or wearing shoes or some that wore loincloths, etc. Those were the kinds of stories and interaction encounters that he was interested in, and that's why he had the very strong uh, thought that they might be more intelligent and more like us, but he also had a lot of questions he didn't have answers for. Unlike some other professors that, you know, it's a monkey, that's what it's going to be. That's what I think it is, so that's what it's going to be. And that's unfortunately where the majority of science is. And that's not going to help the discovery of them, and it's not going to help us make any kind of contact with them. And that's another reason why I'm also trying to bring forward the arcana and the language, because if we can learn to write in the arcana, or we can learn to read the arcana, maybe there'll be a way we can interact with them, and that might bring more information forward quicker, or might give us a basis of understanding so that we have an avenue to pursue. Okay, Sunflower, do you know which species can be orangutan colored? Yeah, both the urine and skukkum are more reddish in color, kind of cinnamon colored in hair, and their hair structure is longer. It's 4 to 6 inches in length and wavy, kinky. So those two I know are red-haired, and the Yaren sometimes they can grow longer hair, like we do. So they'll ponytail it or they'll braid it, and they'll do both hairstyle ties. And there's also a species in Mongolia that's got red hair and that also has long hair on their heads, and they'll wear a bun. But I don't know if there are any of them left anymore. But the tribe was called the Boro people, and they were blue-skinned in the face. Their facial features were very human, but their skin tone and their overall body structure was very primate-like. And then they had the longer hair. But not all Bigfoot grow long hair. Like Jenjin and the Gwantch, Oma and Gwantch, they've got very primate-looking bodies and features, though their faces are much more human-looking. They have normal-ish looking human-like mouth, but they don't grow long hair on their heads. And the other peculiar thing is that the Gugwe, who is born bald and don't ever produce hair on the tops of their heads, they'll have a ruff just around the ear and around the back of the head at that height of hair that's longer and will actually be 6-8 inches in length, though they're completely bald on top. And I'm kind of wondering, since we don't know where the bald gene comes from, it really makes me wonder if the Gugwe is where we inherited our bald gene from, because if they can crossmate with us, that would potentially be the answer there. And, green eyes and blue eyes, which are actually two of the rarest colors, other than, like, yellow. Dogmen have blue eyes. At least the ones in this area do. Because, I lived around one for 7 months. And that might be where we get our blue eyes, because Native American, my tribe, one of them, claimed that we're the offspring of a dogman father and an Oma woman, and that we came out hairless and looking like this, without the features of either of our parents. And that does seem to be the theme within the Bigfoot culture, the Bigfoot species lines. Two unalike parents will produce an unalike offspring. So the parents don't have to look like each other, and the offspring probably won't look like the parent. If they're of two different species, they'll throw something else as an offspring. If they're both Oma, they'll have Oma babies. If they're both Gwantch, they'll have Gwantch babies. But if they mate with something else, they might throw an Omar or a Gwantch, or they will throw something else. It might be a human being looking child. And I do have one picture of one individual that might be that kind of a thing, a human being born to a Gwantch family. Because the only other answer is somebody walked off in the woods and is camping out with a Bigfoot. If it isn't their offspring, then it's somebody who's intentionally gone into the woods with them. Because those are the only two potential answers. No other reason for a person that doesn't have any hair on their body to be out in the woods in the same territory and acting in the same way. Hiding under bushes and hiding behind rocks and behind trees and all that, that's very Sabe behavior. That's very Bigfoot behavior, but that's not commonly what we do as human beings. So I'm assuming that picture is probably of one of their offspring that looks like us. And I have talked to a few people online in the past that describe mixed groups. You got Sabe Bigfoot, and then you got people that look like us, that's in the same group, and they live in the same way. The people don't wear clothes, they don't act any differently than the Bigfoot they live around. So those groups are potentially, having young that look like us, which would indicate that the family stories and the native lore is correct. We may have actually come from some sort of crossbreeding of them creating us. Okay, Jason, if you gift them, Sabe, you better be committed to give them gifts. This is what I've heard. That's not been my experience. I've never really had a bad reaction if I don't give them the right gift. They'll just leave it behind, they won't pick it up. If you can't give them something, they don't care. It's just like us, you know. Hey, I can spare a loaf of bread today, but I can't do that tomorrow. Uh, you know, you just go hungry that day. So I don't understand why people have that thought. Maybe the group is in depletion. Maybe there's some sort of they're not getting enough food, and they'll get grumpy over that sort of thing. But Jenjin, I used to pull vegetables out of our garden and take them to her on a daily basis. I'd pull fruit off the trees, etc. She never got angry with me if I didn't bring her something to eat. She'd just go forage for herself. And all the ones that I've interacted with since interacting with her as a child, I've never gotten a bad reaction, like I'm gonna get attacked or hurt or things thrown at me or anything like that if I didn't bring them something. They don't care. They don't have any kind of bad reaction that I'm aware of, and I don't know where people get that idea. I don't understand that because it's not been my experience. And the stories that I have from my family's lore don't suggest that they get violent if they don't get fed. They're not an animal that's habitualized. They do their own thing. We're just either something they accept in their territory and interact with, or they don't accept us and they don't give a fuck. So I'm really wondering about a lot of the stories. You know, either they're stories where somebody's made a mistake, or you know, they're not dealing with a Bigfoot, or there's something else going on. Because I've been around so goddamn many of these things in my life. If they were reactionary, like a primate, I should have been dead a bazillion times. And out of every kind of interaction I've ever had, I've only had one incident where I got the feeling I should get the out of the area because the Sabe was pissed at me. And that was because I made a fucking mistake. You know, not Gugwe. No, they'll come after you anyway. But you know, to actually make a mistake in the Sabi Bigfoot areas, deal with the good ones, you have to make a pretty severe, really severe mistake before they get aggressive with you. At least that's been my experience. My God, dog, you're really hungry. And she's snoring. Oh, baby girl. So, I think that's more an assumed behavior. You know, when you people say, "Well, don't feed them; you'll habitualize them. They'll come into your territory. They're already in your territory. You built your house in the middle of their. You built your house in the middle of their tribal land or residential area. You plopped your house in their home. You're not going to habitualize them. They're already there. You put your park in the middle of where they already lived. You put your roadway through where they already live. There is no habitualization stuff. That's a myth in our own minds. It's non-existent. It's not reality. I mean, I walk 2 miles up the road. They're everywhere. I stay at my house. They come to my house. Nobody in this neighborhood gets hurt by them. Hell, nobody even recognizes that they're there because you hear the sound, you smell the smells, you're around it all your life. You just don't recognize what you're experiencing. You know, you don't understand that that's actually another life form moving around you because you never visually see it. You only see the ground spore. You never auditorily hear it. And if you do hear it, you don't know what you're hearing. Uh, all of these screams and yowls and stuff. The 4 years that Jenjin was on our property, with the exception of the few times she'd go up and scream for a mate, she never made a sound. She didn't growl, she didn't grumble, she didn't whoop, she didn't anything. They non-communication. You could go and talk to her. You could sit under a bush and have a conversation with her, but she didn't act like a. Sorry about that. The internet's been. Sorry about that. The internet's been really dodgy all day today. It's been going out for the last like 5 or 6 hours today. So if I end up losing connection, I'm sorry. But as I was saying, she didn't make any sounds. When I was living around the dog man for 7 months, other than the fight with the bear and a coyote attack on a young one, I never heard them. I didn't yowl, whoop, growl, nothing. You have to understand these people are hiding from us. They're avoiding us. So why would they make a sound? But again, I've been around them a lot, and they don't. What we think they act like, what we think they're doing, is not what's really happening out there. I mean, you've seen all my videos. You've seen all the little ground spore evidence and the tracks and all that stuff. You ever hear them growl? Every once in a while, you'll hear knocks, you'll hear taps. I will get growled at every once in a while. But it's not a big growl. It's not a roar. It's not something that you can hear more than, a few feet away. I don't know what these people are doing to get the bad reaction, other than that they're, inciting a bad reaction. I don't go around and tap on wood because I don't know the entire sequences. I know a few of them, and I got a really good understanding of, remembering what my grandmother was saying about certain taps mean certain things, and in certain sequences they mean certain things, and, the rhythm of them, and a lot of little details. But I don't know that language incredibly well. But I don't go out and tap. I don't would knock. I don't use any kind of sound to elicit a response. I just go and look at the ground spore, see where they're at, and then I position myself where they cross through and try to catch, sound bites of them or evidence of them that's auditory. And hopefully I'll have some more of that soon. But you don't hear anything out of the ordinary in my videos, and that's because they don't they don't make a lot of sound. So I think a lot of the bad behavior on our part might be, creating them, or eliciting a bad response from them. I don't think that's normal behavior for them, because it's not been my experience. And my grandmother, when she was growing up around the Yarren, she said you barely heard them. The only time you would hear them is if there was some sort of a scuffle with a cougar or a bear in the area. Other than that, you didn't hear them. You'd have to go find them and talk to them. And my mom, too, when she was on her turnout and around the Ishka, what we call Janoskwa, she said they didn't make any calls. They didn't whoop, they didn't holler, they didn't do anything like that unless you came into the area and you were being aggressive. And they still spoke, they sat down and have a conversation with you. So I think a lot of our concepts, our perception of them is, you know, we don't know what they are, so we're making some assumptions on what we hear from them. But most of that I think is reactionary out of from them. You know, we're eliciting a response. I mean, and it's not their normal behavior. Their normal behavior is to collect food, to socialize with each other, and to avoid us. That's and then you got their teaching behaviors and their jungle gyms and their language classes and that sort of thing, and teaching each other how to hunt and tool working and all of that, and fire building and all that. That's their daily lives. They don't run around acting goofy. They don't swing from trees. They don't act like baboons or gorillas or anything like that. And the one time I called Jenjin a monkey, she told me she wasn't a monkey. Because she knew what a monkey was, evidently. Because her exact words, not a monkey. I'm not a monkey. So she did not self-identify as a monkey. She identified as a person. And that was, her name, Jenjin, golden person. So the word person is how they refer to themselves. That's the same word that we use, person. So they don't see themselves as an animal. And I think that's a huge misunderstanding on our part. I think we're judging them by the monkey suit. We look at them, all the pictures that we see of them, we think that they're all the same. We think that they're all just big hairy apes. And that's as far as our mind goes on that. And that's not going to help doing any kind of research, because that's pigeonholing it. You already put them in a box, and the box is not relevant. It's not the right box, unfortunately. I'm wondering if there's anything else I can let you guys know about before I try to head off to bed. What the heck time is it getting to be? Oh my gosh, it's 5:30 in the morning. Thank God I don't have to be at work till 5:30 tomorrow. And my boss is trying to talk me into doing 9-hour shifts. I'd like the money, but I don't want to give up the time that I have to go out in the woods. Uh-oh, getting some messages. So anyway, I think I'm going to cut it here since it's at 2 hours and 17 minutes, unless you guys got some more questions. And I'm going to try to get some more auditory stuff out of him. I've figured out a couple of locations where they pass through, and they actually try to communicate with me. So I'm going to hopefully get some more words. And after this is off, I will post a little soundbite, and I'll give a good explanation, hopefully a good explanation of what's going on. And hopefully the YouTube will give me the option to link the two videos together, related video, because I don't always get that option. Otherwise, I'll try to, refer in the description information to let you guys know that these two need to go together, so you have some sort of comparison. And then we'll see how this area goes. This is so far the Dogman area that's now flooded, and this area that I'm working on now seems to be the most active for, verbal communication, which is one of those things that I don't think a lot of people have. Other than like the Sierra sounds, which is something I've got to work on again more. There's one of my subscribers was very nice and put the cleaned up Sierra sounds recording online for me. So I gotta take a listen to that, and hopefully that will give me a better chance to translate and pull more information out of that particular sound recording. And hopefully I can clarify the script, the text, the translations, and, provide some sort of better resource of information on that. And maybe some of what I've written down might need to be changed because, my hearing might not have heard it right. So we'll see how much of it changes. I don't think a lot of it's going to change, and hopefully I'll be able to add more to it, because with a cleaner version of the soundtrack, all the fuzz eliminated out of it, all the hissy fuzz, that should really make the background sounds pop out more. But as you can tell, and I again, mimicking. If they were mimicking the people up there, if they were mimicking Ron Moorhead, for instance, they would be saying back to him what he said. They wouldn't be having their own conversation and saying, what the fuck, where, what, how. That is not mimicking. That's them communicating with each other about the people going, what the fuck. Just imagine two human groups together. because that's the kind of shit that's going on. Sorry for my language, but that's more the fact. And that recording actually very clearly brings forward that they're not mimicking. They're actually having conversations between each other, and there's at least one Sabe name is stated in that sequence of sounds. Maybe I'll be able to find another one. But I think there's just the one name. At least so far, I haven't heard another one. But the language indicates that they were taking up a defensive position about the people there, and they were trying to defend themselves and call things back, and talking about the human beings were stupid buyers, meaning, that trading post is still active as a trading post. So, humans got up there and got some good calls and whoops and knocks, but they completely misunderstood the communication that was going on, unfortunately. But that's probably just because they don't have any lore or information about it. They don't have the concept. So, anywho, I'm going to finish my morning. I'm going to go to bed, and I hope you guys have some fun. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll try to do something over the weekend again. I'm just not sure what day I'm going to have free enough to do something yet, but I need to go and get more recordings done. And I'm really glad you guys are here, and I'm glad you're hanging tough and you're solid people. I love you. You have a good morning. Have a great day at work.